track.
Hello and welcome to Run Talk with Dom.
Hello.
And me, Ollie, co-founders of Run Riot. This podcast features conversations with runners talking about what running is release means for them.
Each episode contains frank discussions about personal endeavours, mental well-being, physical challenges. Basically, loads of good content related to running.
Hello and welcome to Run Talk. The clue is in the name. We do some running in beautiful surroundings and we do some talking, mostly about running, David. You've got me and Dom, the co-founders of Run Riot, and more importantly, we have David Thomas with us today as our special guest. And David, you're a very difficult man to introduce because of your many different interests, professional interests, but I will try and do you justice with a few highlights if I can. So first and foremost, you are a part-time farmer in this beautiful environment that we're in. You're also a co-founder of the Foundry Gyms, a performance coach of 20 years, and you are a lecturer, again I've forgotten, in
Sport and exercise psychology.
Sport and exercise psychology, great. So we're going to do a lot of talking about running and all the benefits of exercise, etc. But first, let's talk about this environment that we're in and your relationship to it, because I think that's really important to you, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard on a day like today not to appreciate it. Sometimes when it's a bit grayer, a little bit blowier, but there's a different relationship with it then. It still makes you feel alive, still like to get out and feel the wind on your face. It definitely wakes you up. But it does help when it's this beautiful. And we're here in God's country, right in the heart of the Yorkshire Dales.
Excellent. And tell us a little bit about what you're doing here as a project and why that's important to you.
Sure. So Nethergill Farm is an upland farm. It's about 400 acres. I say we're about 150, 200 metres here above sea level. And it's marginal land. It's a difficult place to live in and you can't grow anything. So you can only really work with livestock. And we're trying to do that in a regenerative, sort of sustainable way to bring together food, the environment, so food, nature and sustainable tourism.
Brilliant. So let's talk about, I think it's really interesting you've got this kind of dichotomy, if you will, between kind of your gym work, proper gym work with weights, etc., and then this other side of things, which is kind of exercise in nature. And at Run Riot we have this phrase, running is release. You had a really nice take on that as running as a way to stop stress becoming distress. And I'd love you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of people think of running as a performance-based approach, or rather they take a performance-based approach to their running. So they'll be thinking about their times, they'll be thinking about their their cadence, and they sort of you get quite reductive. And sometimes we miss the big picture, which is actually how it makes us feel. I mean that both physically and mentally and emotionally. And so for a lot of people, there is both I'm feeling a bit low, I want to get outside, I want to connect with nature or with my environment and I want to use my body, but then similarly there is I'm okay at the moment but I don't want to feel worse, and it almost becomes a preventive or like a coping strategy. And
I think that really chimes with me. That's how I run, that's why I run, in fact, is to just kind of keep on an even keel, if you will, and I think there is something different about running in this kind of environment versus a quick run up and down the road at home. You have a different kind of way of running in this environment, or I do. I think I kind of slow down and just take it in a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's very individual, and I think everyone's journey is individual with running, right? So some people do it because they might have low mood and that's where they started, and then it becomes a coping strategy afterwards. Their mood improves and then it becomes, this is how I prevent distress. For other people, it's an opportunity to get out into places like this to connect with their environment. For other people, it's it is a form of transport if we're in the city, with something we were talking about earlier. I prefer walking and running when I'm in London to get to places, because I still get to experience the city in a way that you don't through a car window or through public transport.
It's also quicker than the bus or the tube.
It usually is, exactly. So I think it's just all about how we can connect with our environments when we're on foot, and that is a very unique experience. Obviously it's something, and then when we're running, we get to cover more distance, so we see more stuff. There's also something in the research about moving your body and actually the physical exertion and feeling very embodied. Like you're aware of your body when you're running, and you're aware of your body in the space it's in as well. And that has a real impact on our sort of cognitive function and therefore our well-being.
So David, you were talking about this relationship with the environment and relationship with nature, and how it can be experienced differently when you're on foot. Do you want to just expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so that's something I've actually done a bit of research in, more with hiking, but I've had colleagues who've looked at it in relation to running as well, and I think it probably feels fairly obvious that we have this sort of desire to be in nature and to connect with nature, but there's something about being on foot where time slows down. You have the opportunity to really soak everything up and to become more of a part of your environment. You're suddenly part of an ecosystem when you're on foot, in a way that you're just not in a car or on a train, or even, it's better on a bike, but it's still the same. You're still generally flying by. And I've often had those experiences where I'm running through a new territory, and somewhere where I might have seen it out of a train window or something, and you see it completely anew, whether that's in the city or somewhere like this. So I find I often run round when I'm in London. I run to places I need to be, just as a mode of transport. As a mode of transport, and as a way of getting to see an environment from a completely different perspective. And I'll just little things, because you can't see that little blue pack that's for some famous figure or whatever. You can't do that when you're in a car or on public transport. And then it's the same here. So it might seem more obvious in a place like this that it's a really good way to connect with nature, but I think it's the same whether you're in an urban environment or somewhere rural.
I think it's funny actually, when we were running earlier, I think when I'm somewhere like this, beautiful surroundings like this, I tend to start slowing down, because you just start soaking it up a little bit. Do you know what I mean? And looking at the stream down there or whatever else. And I think that's whereas if I'm in the city and I'm trying to dodge through people, I use it as a mode of transport. I'm just trying to get from A to B.
That's interesting. Yeah, there's I won't get too into the theory for you, but something called ecological dynamics theory, and the idea is that the environment affords us, so they're called affordances. It provides things that we have to react to, whether it's tree stumps or going over stones, and it's the same in the city, but it's sort of like, how do we react to that? So how do we physically react to that? We are embodied beings, and then what's the impact on our both our mental state, so cognitively, but then how does that impact our emotions off the back of that as well? And there's something, you'll have experienced it. We talk about running as release, but you'll have felt those moments running when you feel alive. You feel like you're part of something, and you feel like you're having to pick your feet, and you're suddenly aware and conscious. And then similarly, you have the other side where you get into flow state, and time just disappears, and you've just knocked out 10k, and you couldn't even tell you where you've been.
It's that sort of strange. Both things can be happening at the same within the same run. Do you know what I mean?
It's what we call flow state and clutch state. So, and you get this across all sports, but running is the same. And I think understanding a little bit about this stuff, about the sort of psychology of movement, and running can absolutely enhance your running without it all being performance-based still. So absolutely, performance psychology can be a really effective tool to go a bit quicker and to build mental toughness and resilience, but it can also really help you improve your well-being and get the very best out of that release.
So
when you're running.
I find if I'm on a long run, one of those slower runs, I'll do exactly that. I'll have that kind of period where I've just switched off, and we talk about kind of it's time for thinking or no thinking at all. And there's that bit where I suddenly go, I'm 4 miles further than I thought I was, but then I stop and kind of look around and go, oh, this is nice. Do you know what I mean? And then I'm back into my head again and thinking.
And there's the slight. So there's also, then in terms of your mental state, you can have the meditative side, and then you can also have the really quite sort of detailed processing side. So do you ever sort of problem solve when you're running?
Yeah, and sometimes it's conscious problem solving, sometimes it's subconscious, problem solving, where at the end of it I feel better about a particular problem, or I've thought about a solution to it. But and I think it can be both within the same run. It just kind of depends on.
Well, that's really interesting. So a participant on one of my studies said exactly that he would go out for a run with a problem in his head, but then wouldn't necessarily think about it on his run, but he'd inevitably come back with the answer. And like you said, a lot of that is happening kind of at a deeper cognitive level, and I think that's fascinating. And there is something about moving our body, especially in that sort of cyclical nature, repetitive nature, that seems very conducive to to just good thinking and good feeling.
So, David, let me ask you a really tricky question.
Excellent.
If you were to give one piece of advice to someone who's thinking about starting running, what would that be?
Okay, just one. Well, I've actually got a really good example now, because my wife has just started doing a couch to 5K as of last week.
Right.
So I've got perfect experience. I think the main thing is there's nothing wrong with thinking about your performance, using your watch to see your speed and so on, those sort of performance metrics. But I would really advise people not to fixate on that. Focus more on how running makes you feel, both physically and mentally and emotionally. And I think just the best attitude is to almost approach running with curiosity. How is this going to make me feel? How am I feeling right now? What's my body saying to me? What am I looking at? What am I smelling, seeing, hearing? Get that multi-sensory perspective. And that's just, in the long run, that's just going to make it a more enjoyable experience. Because the one thing we want to avoid is somebody starting all guns blaring, going out like the clappers, worrying about their time. They get injured, they get, disheartened, and then they stop.
And so, how is this advice working for you and your wife then?
Well, we had our first ever run together in 20 years today.
Yeah.
So, and it was very nice. We had a little chat.
How very poignant.
It was extremely poignant. Yeah, it couldn't be better timing. Very serendipitous. And I think it was interesting because I won't lie, I gave her a couple of little pointers just because she hasn't really run before, and that, I think she found that quite helpful. But to be honest, most of it we were doing in silence, and just at the end I said to her, I'm so proud of you, and also I'm really just enjoying this experience together. This is something we've never done together, and it's quite rare after 20 years to still be finding something new.
Yeah.
And I just love that was running.
And I've got to ask you, when we were watching ourselves being filmed running, the three of us running, Ollie was very critical of his gait and his form.
Okay.
I was the same about
You were
myself.
critical of his as well.
Oh, very critical, yeah. And we were looking at you, and there were a few pointers maybe there, but it's one of those things that even after decades of running, form is something you can always improve upon. And I always say to myself when I go for a run, the first kilometre, I'm kind of remembering how to run, let alone any kind of technique or anything like that. It's just the physical act. Is there any kind of science behind this?
Yeah, there is to agree. I think mindful running is kind of where we're sort of all trying to move to. And I think, again, that's just being aware of, like, if you're constantly looking at your watch, it's very hard to be aware of what your body's actually telling you.
Yeah.
And, before we were talking about affordances, so, avoiding things on the ground. And the irony you find is when you're very aware of that, when you have to avoid obstacles and so on, actually it's a little bit easier to be a little bit more efficient with our gait and so on, because we want to make sure we're not falling over or whatever, we're a bit more mindful.
Yeah.
Sometimes, if we're just pounding out the miles, I guess we can, like I say, we can kind of clock off, and that's great if you've got a great gait and it's almost automative at that point, you're okay. But I think still just checking in with your body and just seeing, like, how is that feeling? How, listen to the sound of your feet on the floor. The reality is, the more you try and I think change your form while you're going, the worse it probably gets.
Yeah.
But I definitely think checking in before a run, during and after, as to how did that feel? How did it, how are my feet feeling? How are these new shoes I've got? Do I just like how that feels or not? I mean, sometimes, this is the thing, you can have the most expensive pair of shoes in the world, but actually the ones you love are your 5-year-old knackered trainers that just feel great.
Music or no music when you're running? Where do you stand on that?
That is a fascinating question. I can plug a friend of mine, Catherine Bean here. She actually did a study specifically on this issue, whether listening to headphones or no headphones is what she was looking at. And what was really interesting from that is it's not even just music. So I remember one of her participants used to run listening to the Test Match Special. Yeah. And that was his sort of meditative process. I mean, it's very relaxing listening to cricket. But me personally, I would say no music. And that's because, and it's a slight segue from running, but I told you I walked from Land's End to John O'Groats for charity, for Headway, a few years back. And part of it was for my own mental well-being as well. And one of the decisions I made was, can I do that? Can I walk, it was, 1,300 miles in the end, can I do that without listening to anything all the way? And I did.
Yeah.
And I won't lie to you, the first couple of weeks was brutal.
Yeah.
Like,
I think
I've
I'd
never
struggle.
spent that much time in my own company, and I didn't particularly like myself at the time either. So it was a really tough place to be. And then over time, I just started feeling more and more comfortable spending 10 hours just in silence or thinking. And I truly would say it was like a meditative experience.
Yeah.
So now, generally, if I'm going out to release, it is without music. If I'm running, an actual workout or trying to maybe stick to a beat, also just more because it kind of helps with pacing and cadence a bit if I pick a tune. One of my mates has just got into DJing at 50 and he makes me some Simon. I'll give him a little shout. He makes me playlists. So I quite listening to his house, funky house.
I think I'm the same as you. Like if I'm running a race, which is not that often, then I like a bit of loud music and I ignore everyone and everything around me and I just listen to the music and run as fast as I can. But my everyday running, I tend not to now.
I would never listen to music here. I want to hear the curlews. I want to hear the wind and this babbling brook and that, because that's the reason I'm running it.
We've got to the part of the chat where I have to ask you some quick fire questions for hopefully some quick fire answers.
You probably realised already that I'm very good at succinct,
pithy, to the point
answers.
Brilliant.
Yeah, right.
Okay, let's go. Running with people or by yourself?
And I can't say it depends. Okay.
Yeah.
By myself.
Yeah. Any reason why?
Headspace.
Your headspace.
My headspace.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do love running with other people, but it's a different thing.
Yep.
For me, if I want to clear my head or if I want to process something, or if I just need time away from my beautiful family, it will be on my own.
Okay. And running is release, obviously.
Running is release.
For you, kilometres or miles?
Kilometres.
Any reason why again?
I'm a European at heart.
Good answer. Morning or evening runs?
I'd love to say morning because I'm a night owl. I'm actually genetically a night owl.
Okay.
I've had my whole genome mapped.
Oh, right.
This. Yeah. But I'm like in the weird 1% global minority of like night owl.
Right.
But I think I've tried to push in the morning. I think I'm going to go for a happy medium and say sort of afternoon.
Right, fair enough. Yeah, and of course it does depend on where you are, which is...
It does. I was running this morning nice and early and that helped. So
I was freezing this morning, but anyway, that's another one. 5K or a marathon?
It used to be 5K, and that's because I was much more performance-based and I really wanted to... I've only had a few sub-20 5Ks,
right,
and I've tried to maintain that as I get older and it's slipping. So these days, now I'm running slower, I'd say marathon.
Marathon's more your style.
But not for time. That
Right,
would just
okay.
I do this thing once a week. I go and run a half marathon,
right,
and I don't care about the time at all. It's purely, I pick a random route, and it is just literally go and run 20k.
Yeah, and I would imagine that somewhere out here is just perfect for that kind of environment. Okay, rain or heat? This is a splitter of the opinions that I've found, at least.
Heat. It's nice and warm today.
100% agree with you.
Yeah.
Ollie's a freak. He likes the rain.
I like a bit of vitamin D.
Yeah,
There's something about the rain driving in your face sometimes to wake you up, but not if I had a choice. It's heat.
Absolutely, 100%. Road or trail?
Trail.
Yeah, I mean, again.
Yeah.
Look where we are. Strava.
Unless I'm trying to get a 5k.
If you're trying to hit the PB. Yeah.
And the hardest concrete there is.
100%.
Achilles be damned.
Strava, no Strava?
Oh, again, that's such a depends. I actually just did a very little experiment with myself where I charted everything for a month and nothing for a month, and I was trying to see, does it actually affect my behaviour? Am I more consistent or whatever? I actually found it made no difference. So,
Zero difference?
Zero difference on me personally. So I'm moving. Oh, this is tough. I'm sorry. This is a terrible long answer. I'm moving away from Strava a little bit, I think.
Really?
I don't care so much about the validation now.
Yeah.
Look at me.
crave
look at me.
for kudos.
Look at me growing.
Yeah, no, that's unhealthy.
I used to be incredibly needy.
Yeah.
So I think, for me personally, this is probably a positive sign that I don't need quite as much social validation.
I wish
for
I
my
was
running.
more like you in that sense. If I don't
As long
get
as
kudos,
my wife tells me I did really well after each run.
oh, that's nice. Yeah, be careful how you answer this, considering what you do. Stretching or no stretching? Honestly.
What's that? Oh no, you ever see a lion stretch? No, stretching. Oh, you can't. This isn't a short form answer.
Go for it.
Okay, so stretching before and after running, fairly unimportant.
Ooh.
Mobility
Yeah.
as a separate thing, very important.
Right.
Okay, so I do a lot of myofascial release. I do a lot of mobility work. I tend to do it separate to the running warm-ups.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that the warm-up is about raising your heart rate and replicating the movement you're going to be doing. So a nice brisk walk is a good way to start running. I think it depends what you're doing. If you're doing track sessions and you're sprinting and so on,
Yeah.
you might want to loosen off your hips and so on.
Yeah.
But then there's the whole thing as well, like, too much static stretching does limit performance before
Yeah.
you're doing something. So it's not something you want to be doing before you go sprinting.
Yeah.
So the succinct answer is it really depends.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm the worst guest you've had for this.
They're pretty
round.
bad, actually, David. I don't mind telling you that. Hill sprints or slow and steady?
Depends on how masochistic I'm feeling. Let's say slow and steady, because
Yeah.
we're focusing on the mental release from running. But I do love a good hill sprint.
I must admit, I think something I've learned this last couple of days is actually that you can go slow and steady and go up a hill.
Yeah, I
and
like doing
mixing it
strides,
up. Yeah,
definitely.
exactly. That's a healthy approach.
And fartlek, which is just a funny word.
It's just I wasn't filming. Say that again.
Well, it legitimately is my favourite beanie, and I've only been wearing it this morning. It's great.
That's good.
And I'm a headgear guy these days.
Oh, really?
And they're just like I told you before. I basically end up looking like sort of like Where's Wally? Like,
Yeah, I've got a few
I
like that.
This is great. I love the
Fitted. Oh,
I love the fitted beanie.